Okay, hello everyone and welcome to our next session for the day, which is with Rebecca Ryder Caddy from Coventry University. Rebecca is an assistant professor and senior lecturer at Coventry University and a senior fellow of the HEA. She is part of the award-winning team behind social enterprise projects Refreshed and Refreshed Unlimited, and was integral to the grand launch of Zone, a luxury women's lifestyle brand. Her academic role has seen her support and build relationships with institutions internationally, including Raffles Singapore and CUZ Zhejiang, China. Prior to joining Coventry University, Rebecca has worked for the University of Derby, delivering specialist CAD inputs to both fashion and textile students. Her design experience includes activewear, performance ski wear, luxury leisure wear, heritage menswear, as well as costume roles for both television and film, including the acclaimed A Reckoning. She is currently pursuing her PhD on the subject, How Fashion and Textile Processes Can Support Child Expression and Development. Today, her talk will focus on fashion design development. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I'll share my screen with you so we can get started straight away, because there's quite a lot I want to talk to you about today, to be honest. So today, as we said in the introduction, I want to talk to you about design development and the process of design development, but some different techniques that you could use as you move forward. So we'll go through a couple of different techniques that different designers use. And then after we've talked about and looked at a couple of examples of those, we'll go on to a demonstration where I'll do some live design development with you on camera. So you'll be able to see, one of the ways that you might approach design development in future. So just to reiterate the introduction, I'm senior lecturer at Coventry University and assistant professor, and I work with our BA honours fashion students predominantly. So much of the work that I do and have done since 2012 revolves around working with undergraduate students here in the UK. However, as said in the introduction, I've been lucky enough to work with lots of our international partners as well. So have experience working with a real range of students from different backgrounds, which is fantastic. So as I said, today we're going to look at different ways that you might consider design developing, and there are a huge range of opportunities in terms of design development and techniques that you might apply when you're approaching this. The key thing with all of these techniques is that design development is about taking a single idea and moving that idea forward one step at a time. I think very often when we look at design development and when students start design development, they think, or they can think, that it's about having a new idea every time. And that's impossible. It's exhausting to try and do that. What we would hope is that you've got enough inspiration that you can have one great idea and can stretch that idea in lots of different directions. So that's what we'll look at today a little bit. So there's three main techniques that I'll talk about with you today. However, these are just three out of many, and all designers do work differently, and all different companies have their own way of working as well. So these are just three options to get you started. So the first technique is what I would call free collage and draw. The second technique I would call digital evolution, which sounds very much as it is, and we'll look at that in a moment. And the third technique that we'll look at today is analog and digital combined. So as you can see from those three titles, we have a combination of sort of traditional collage and draw techniques, digital and much more contemporary technology-based techniques, and then combining the two of those. And it's important to say at this stage, no one of those is better than the others. They're all equally valid, depending on how you choose to work and how the client that you're working with prefers to work. So if we look a little bit more at free collage and draw, there's a couple of things that are really key to this one. This is about using the resources that are available, and particularly in the last year or two, it's been difficult for people to get out and to buy and find and source different materials that we would traditionally use, perhaps in the fashion workshops or studios. So this is a really great technique for using what you have available, what you have to hand. When we've done workshops with students in this last 12 to 18 months, and we've used these free collage and draw techniques, we've used found papers, magazines, old maps, leaflets, brochures, and catalogues, all sorts of different found papers. And it can even be scraps of material, scraps of trims, and found objects from around your home or your room or your office. So this is a really great technique for being resourceful and using whatever is available. With this one, the key lesson to keep in mind is don't try to collage shapes that are already closed. So if you started with an image like you can see on the right of the screen here, the key here would not be to try and collage a dress onto this figure. The key is to try and collage interesting loose shapes, colours and textures, and to piece them together in interesting ways. How they become garments is how you draw from that collage later. So at the first stage, this is much more about creating interesting shapes, textures, and colour combinations. So as I said on the notes here, after collaging, you would draw from that collage and see how those shapes, colours, textures, etc. could become product or print, or even silhouette or seam placement. So I've put some examples on here which really emphasize what we were saying about design development being a single idea experimented in lots of different ways. So these are 5 loose collages done with the same cut out pieces, which I actually have over here to my right on my table. So they're the same pieces moved around in different ways, and not one of these was intended to be a garment. These are about creating interesting shapes and layers and combinations. So just to push this idea further, I've done an example here where I've taken one of those collages, which was, again, a loose collage of shape, and I've drawn from that. And even from the drawing, we still don't have a fixed garment, a fixed accessory, an idea. But from this, you could take print design, you could take textile design, you could take seam placement, you could take silhouette. And all of those ideas come from this drawing and would then be refined as part of the design development process. So I think one of the important lessons, particularly with this technique, is that it really isn't about seeing something and drawing a garment or drawing a product. It's about each tiny step in that process being really valuable in order to reach something new and innovative and interesting. So here's another example where this has started with a muse or a face as a starting point, and then the collage has gone around that muse, and then the drawing from that has become much more like a fashion illustration. But that would then start the design development of what those products, what those lines actually mean later. So again, it's a very slow step-by-step process, and we can't skip to the end. We can't reach the final outcome without going through that development. So we'll look now briefly at the second technique that we talked about, which is digital evolution. And there's an example here, but this is very much more about using those digital skills that you might have, but certainly the industry expects people to have later on, certainly. And this is about using, instead of collaging layers physically, you can use digital layers on screen and montage images together with different layers of transparency. This technique relies more on technical drawing skills because you're using the digital technology. So by its nature, so much of the drawing here is more technical. And I've put in a short video here which explores an example of design development using this more digital technique. And as you can see in this example, the design development starts with the technical drawing rather than starting with a loose creative illustration type collage, which is what the first technique looked at. So everyone will work in a different way and have different preferences. Some of us are more technically minded and this would suit you better. Some of us are more creative and artistic in terms of how we work, in which case the collage technique might suit you better. And there isn't a right or wrong answer. You might be asked to do things a certain way because that's what your course or your client or your employer wants. But there is no way that's better than another. They're just different ways of working. And as you can see from this example on screen, very quickly, granted, but what we end up with here is a very quick range of 5 different front and back views of the trouser. And this really emphasizes, if we just skip forward, we can see it larger size there. This really emphasizes that each one of these is design development. Each one is like a brother or a sister to the one before, but they're all slightly different on the front view and the back view. And this really gives us that, reminds us that design development isn't about a new idea each time. It's about taking one idea and pushing it in lots of different directions. As you can see with this more technical approach, it's very much the technical details that are the focus of the design development. And that's really because of this project that we're looking at here. However, it could be more about the textile details or the print details. This just happens to be the seam details on a pair of trousers. Another thing that you can see on this example is that we're looking at the front and the back view, but it's really important that we think about the body as a 360-degree thing. We're three-dimensional and we don't have side seams. We don't have a front and a back. So when you're doing design development, it's really important that you think about the body as a moving three-dimensional thing, and that we try and accommodate that and try and work around the body as much as possible. The third technique we'll introduce here is that combination of the two. So we're using traditional collage and building techniques and drawing techniques, and we're combining that with those more digital, slightly more technical approaches. So with this, as we said, it's a combination of both. This can include both physical collage as well as digital layers and montage. And this will make use of digital image editing software. So things like Photoshop and Illustrator. This will combine those skills with the more traditional collage and drawing techniques, as well as perhaps 3D model making. So I've put an example on here, and there is a short video which I'll show next, which shows this process. But again, this really emphasized that each different development is one step from the previous one slight difference. And that's why we can see that process and that progressive movement between each stage in that development. So there's a short video here that I've included just to show that combination of two-dimensional and traditional techniques working on paper, and how that becomes more digital and how the two different approaches work together. So as you can see at the moment on screen, we've got a scanned hand-drawn image, and that was a very quick run through how that can be edited so that we can use that on screen, in this case, in Adobe Illustrator. So what you can see here is, instead of physically collaging with paper, this approach looks for inspiration using digital montage. So digitally cutting out shapes and textures from images which are particularly inspiring, but also relevant to the story and to the narrative and the muse, the customer that we've got in mind here. So you'll see in a moment how quickly this goes from being one idea and one silhouette to being a development. And as you can see, the way that that collage was laid over the figure at the top, that rock over the shoulder really forms the basis of this development. And each individual character here is a single step from the one before. So they're all ever so slightly different, but none of them are new ideas. I think once we start to adjust to that way of thinking where each one is a slight difference, it really does become much easier for students and practitioners to be able to design develop effectively. And what I would always say to students or practitioners is, it might be that you develop something 20 different ways. It might be at the end that you prefer the first one or the second one, and that's okay. But you've tried all the different options to know that that's the right answer. And this on screen is a good example of that, trying as many different routes as you can to really make sure that the decisions you make are exactly, you know, what they should be, what you want them to be, rather than being the first choice that you made and therefore the only option. Okay, so on the screen next here, you'll see what happened next in that design development process. So that's where we ended that page at this top figure here. And then as you can see, it went back from digital back into the more traditional and analog drawing and collaging to develop further, and then into 3D paper model making as part of the design development to try and develop the ideas of how the piece might be constructed, how it would work three-dimensionally. And as you can see, this model has then been imposed onto the illustration at the bottom to give us a sense of how it would work around the body. And this is a very small paper model that that was used here, but that's really effective. And again, really makes use of what resources you've got available, especially if you've not been able to go out and buy and source different or more specialist equipment. So masking tape or paper tape and squared paper, that's all this one needed. And that's been enough to really get that idea and develop it further. So what I'd like to do now with you is a demonstration with the rest of our time. And the technique I've chosen to demonstrate with you, for you, is the free collage and draw technique. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now so you can see, hopefully see me. And I would ask, are we able to pin me to the full screen, please, if that's possible, just so the students or the guests with us today are able to see what I'm doing full screen. And as you can see, I'm in my office. This is where the chaos happens here. But hopefully, I'm just going to put my lights on, and you should be able to see what I'm working with here. Okay, so what I've got in front of me, I've gone through some found magazines, some editions of Vogue, but you can use any magazines or any found materials you've got. And if you're working on a particular project or theme, it's likely that you'll already have a customer or a muse in mind. Because of the demonstration here, I don't have a customer yet. So I've cut out a range of different possible models or muses that could be part of my design development later. But at this stage, what I've got here is choice. And it's not a bad thing to just start doing this and keeping these ready for when projects come up. And as you can see, I've got a bank of different figures and faces here, depending on what projects might arise, that I can use for my design development process. So it's quite a good technique to get into the habit of keeping these resources ready and available for you. Now on screen, when we look through the different examples, all of the free collage and draw examples that we showed started with a muse or a model on the page. And what I'd like to do is work the opposite way, just to show you an alternative way of working. And that is to create the collage and then to see how the body or the face might fit into that. So if you're working on a project that already has a theme or a customer or a client or a trend or a season, then you'll already have an idea of color and shape that you're working toward for your project. I don't have that for this because it's a demonstration, but I've chosen a theme just to make things a bit easier for myself as we move forward. So I've chosen this, to look at shapes from jewelry. And also I've got some really lovely images of trims and textile details as well. So they're going to be my starting point today. And again, it's a good idea to start to save any images that you do find interesting so you can use them in your future work. I'm going to work quite quickly today because I want to cover as much as I can with you guys in the live session. But you would obviously take your time and be very careful when you're working with your own collage techniques. Now, again, I'm using images cut from magazines, but we have done this in the past working with, as I said, maps, floor plans from buildings. They're really great to work with if you're looking at something geometric in shape. Furniture, I've got some furniture images somewhere in this pile as well because they're really fab to work with. One thing I would try and avoid working from is other garments or other products the same as you're intending to develop, because it's very, very easy to copy what someone else has already done, to copy what you can see already. And what we want is to create something much more original and innovative rather than to repeat something that's already been done. So try and avoid using images which are already quite similar to your final intended outcome. So if you know you're doing a project on footwear and you're designing shoes or boots, I would avoid using shoes or boots in your collage. Similarly, if you're working on women's wear, I would avoid using images of women's wear in your collages. What you can do if you've got a really fabulous image of some great texture or color is cut out the color and texture and use that. That's absolutely fine. But you'll often get something much more interesting if you follow the shapes of a different kind of product. Architectural images are great. Anything from buildings and interiors can work really, really well. I'm going to go straight for these textile images here because I think these are gorgeous. And there's really no right or wrong with how you cut these because we are all very different, and what we see and how we use it is all very different. And that's what makes our own design development unique and individual. And that's why these steps in the process are so important to making sure that we create something that's new. Oops. I'm trying to follow the lines that the images are giving me. It's difficult sometimes because it's tempting to just go your own way. But as we'd always say to any of our students, try and follow the research. Don't try and tell it where to go. Try and follow what it's telling you and where it's telling you to go. Okay, so I've got some nice shapes for starting to get together here. And I don't have an idea in mind of what this product might be. So I'm going to let the shapes dictate what the product could be. And then, as I said earlier with this technique, it would be very much about drawing from this collage and seeing what the drawings look like they could be, and using that as a starting point for your design development then. And this is an activity we've done with different students internationally to really loosen up where we start with for our design ideas, because it's very, very often when students start to design develop, and even practitioners, not just students, when they start to design ideas, often they start with a body or they start by drawing a figure. And it's very hard not to follow the shape of that figure then if you work in that direction in that way. And what we want to do is create something that's more innovative in terms of silhouette or shape. So by starting without a body, you're giving yourself more options there in terms of how this piece might fit, how this piece might relate to a customer or to a muse or a model. Okay, so we've got the outline there of an armchair going on. And I've got a matching armchair actually in the opposite direction, so I'm going to use that one as well. And then at this point, I'm going to stop cutting after this one and we'll start piecing these onto the paper to see how they work. Okay, so let's have a look now at the shapes that we've got here. Fab. Okay, so hopefully you can see that clearly on screen. We've got a real range of shapes, but the colours all work together quite nicely, and that's really key with starting to pull this together. They're united by texture, but also by colour, and that's because of whatever story it is you would be starting with for your design development. So at this stage, I'm not thinking about product, remember, I'm just thinking about how these shapes could work together. And then I'm going to think about how this fits on the body afterwards. Okay, so we can see that we're starting to get a sense of depth already and layers. Oops, we're almost there. And as you can see, although I am rushing this somewhat because I want to cover as much as I can, as you can see, this can be a really quick process and it's really quite fun, which makes it much easier to do than sometimes when we start with the idea of design development and you're having to start with generating new ideas each time. It can feel like hard work. It can feel like, you know, it's quite arduous as a task, whereas this makes it feel much easier and much more enjoyable, which really art and design should be. Okay, so what I've done there is put together all of the pieces we've collaged. You don't have to use all of the pieces, and I'm just going to photograph those because that will make it easier for me to use them after. There we go. I've sent that photo straight up to my screen there. So if you just bear with me a moment, I could show you in a bit more detail what I've just been working on. There we go. So that's the collage I've just put together at this stage. So as you can see, it's quite quite loose, quite rough, but that's okay. And what I would do now is start to think how this might fit in or around the body and at what scale the body would be next to this. So I've got some different shapes, sizes of muse. And ideally, if you already know what your customer's profile would be, you would work with several sizes of different images of your muse. So you'd have some where the head's very small and some where the head's much larger. And you would use that as your starting point. But at this stage, I can start putting my muse around and into this image to see how they would work together. And again, I'll just pop this example on screen for you so you can see it. And as you can see, even though we're working very traditionally with analog techniques with collage and drawing here, there we go. So that's the very quick starting point of how this piece might fit or how this silhouette might fit around the body. Although we're starting with something which is very analog and traditional in style, we are including digital techniques here in terms of moving it from flat to screen so that we can revisit it later. And I think this is, some people find technology quite off-putting or quite intimidating in the design process, but hopefully this shows that actually it can work really well with us when we're creating new ideas. I'm just going to do a very quick drawing of this idea. So do excuse me because it will be very quick and loose. Just to give an indication of what I would do next with this. And again, all I'm doing is responding to the the textures and the shapes that I can see in front of myself. I'm still not thinking what this actually is as a product yet. Interestingly, I tend to often have eyes and hands in my work, so it's quite interesting that we've got an eye in this image as well. Okay, so that's a very rough drawing I've just done in pencil. All I'm going to do now is highlight some of these details and features, just so that it's clear for you all to see on camera there. So do excuse me for the speedy drawing, because she'll be a little bit wobbly at this stage and a bit unrefined. But hopefully we'll get the idea. And again, I keep looking back at the actual collage itself to make sure I'm capturing the textures I can see in front of myself. And what you can see is, although I am rushing this somewhat, it can be a very quick process. And often that's for the better, because we're not overthinking what it should be at this stage, or we're not trying to translate it into a product. This is very much just about going with your instincts and following, you know, what you feel it should be as your starting point. Okay. So at this stage, I would normally, well, I spend a lot longer adding detail onto my drawing, and then adding some color because the color is so important to the collage itself. However, I do have the starting point that I could base future design development on. So I'm just going to photograph that for you. And we'll pop that one on screen. Bear with me, the technology is going as quick as it can. Oh, I'll pop my light off. Quite ghost light with the lights on there, sorry. Okay, so I've not edited the lighting or the contour on that at all, but at this very early stage, you can see from a very quick collage where we've not actually stuck any of our images down yet. We're still just able to then move them around the page if we're not happy or if we wanted to do another version. But we already have an idea of some shapes on the body and some proportion together. Now already I can see I would develop this shoulder piece into a key feature of a product, which could be an accessory, it could be a garment. It does depend on what your area of specialism is. And I could develop this piece down here into something really quite three-dimensional, either a huge quilted sleeve, for example, or something much more structural and transparent where we can see a framework in a garment or in a product. And using these cushions toward the bottom of the collage there, you can see that that would inspire or has inspired something that could be almost a flat panel in a garment, could be an accessory, for example, a bag or an apron that would wrap around the body. And even though we're working with a front view of a muse here, we do get an idea of how these pieces wrap. So I think as a key takeaway from this, regardless of what techniques you're aiming to use, really keep thinking about how the body, what it looks like when the body turns and moving around. And some of the examples of different muses that I've cut from my own examples here. Again, it depends with which magazines you have available, but I've tried to pick out somewhere the body is in different positions so that I'm able to, it's a great example here, so that I'm really able to think about the body, not just from a front view, but from a range of angles. And you could use any of those as a starting point to really help yourself work in a different way and create something completely new and innovative. Okay, I think I've managed to keep nearly to time there, which is quite impressive for me because I get overexcited. Was that okay for you, Anahita?
That was great, Rebecca. Thank you so much. The live demo especially has been very beneficial. So,
good.
Yeah. So anything more you have to say?
No, just if anyone had any questions, but I'm happy to answer those via email after if you'd rather.
Yeah, okay. So if you get anything, we'll send them your way.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
Your presentation started right at the beginning of the design process, taking us through the various techniques that we designers use as building blocks in our design practice. I'm sure that the range of traditional and contemporary techniques you shared would benefit any design student across disciplines. The focus on experimentation and innovation resonates with us here at UID. And thank you so much again for making this very interesting demonstration and for making the time for us here today. It was an absolute pleasure, and it took me back to my uni days.
Oh, good. And keep playing. I think that's the key lesson. Keep playing and experimenting.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.